Welcome back to Harvard. The debate now over whether American automakers should receive another $25 billion in bailout heated up today as the top executives from the Big Three testified in Congress after flying in yesterday on their private luxury jets at the cost of $20K per jet. And all three jets, by the way, traveled separately. Here's what New York Congressman Gary Ackerman, this guy is a real piece of work. I love Gary Ackerman. Here's what he said to these guys when they showed up.
There's a delicious irony in seeing private luxury jets flying in to Washington, D.C., and people coming off of them with tin cups in their hand, saying that they're going to be trimming down and streamlining their businesses. It's almost like seeing a guy show up at the soup kitchen in high hat and tuxedo.
It's like having a guy show up in the soup kitchen in high hat and tuxedo. Well, that's a big question. Does the American auto industry deserve the bailout? And are these three jokers doing the job of... So can you spare $25 billion? American auto industry executives have a plan, and they brought it to Capitol Hill today. Give us $25 billion more to buy us some time. Well, here's a plan from me. The executives responsible for bringing GM, Ford, and Chrysler to the brink of bankruptcy shouldn't make any more than the President of the United States. If they're going to be paid basically by the government of the United States, they ought to get government salaries. And let's limit those salaries at the President's level, $400,000 a year. Can they live on that? We'll talk.
Can Barack Obama, the newly elected Democrat as President of the United States, look Detroit in the eye and say, drop dead?
I think he can. He may have to, Tom. You know, Carl Levin, what did he say? He said, you know, just give us this $25 billion and we'll be okay. Tom, if I thought with $25 billion we could save this industry, I'd be for it, okay? But I see no plan right now, no reason to suggest that these people who have driven this industry into a complete ditch have a plan to get it out in the long term and not come back to us 3 months from now for another $25 billion. Show me that plan. Remember, what was Detroit's plan 2 years ago when they confronted this problem? It was to subsidize gasoline at $1.99 a gallon if you bought a Hummer or a Suburban or a big truck. That was their idea of innovation. So, you know, it was like a crack dealer offering subsidized crack rather than, you know, going to a clinic to get off the drug. And who was the enabler of that? The enabler of that were the Carl Levins, all the Michigan delegation, who didn't go to these people. The outrage of these people. Now, we have to save these jobs. Where was their outrage 2 years ago, okay, about getting them to be more innovative, to getting them on top of the energy efficiency question? They have been enabling the destruction of this industry. So show me a plan. Show me a plan that says, if we give you this $25 billion, you're actually going to change. Absent that, remember, Tom, we're going to charge this $25 billion on our kids' Visa cards. This goes on our kids' Visa cards, and we have a moral obligation to make sure this is spent wisely.
Robinson, you have been writing about this. We're going to share with our viewers now from your column. Detroit blames its situation on the financial and economic crisis. It's true that demand for cars has fallen off a cliff, largely because many would-be buyers are unable to get financing. It's also true that the auto industry claims to have seen the light about making energy-efficient cars. But it's also true that these newly enlightened executives spent years defending their industry's obsession with SUVs and poo-pooing the idea that times and taste would ever change. Do those three executives who appeared here in Congress last week have to just hang it up and walk away?
I think they do. I think for the country to have confidence in any sort of, and let's, you know, call it a bailout or restructuring or whatever, but the U.S. government is going to have to put money into it, and for people to have confidence in that, I don't think they have confidence in current management. I think a lot of people on Capitol Hill don't either. I had a long talk with a veteran Democratic senator on Thursday, the kind of guy who recognizes how disruptive a failure of GM would be, a failure of any of the automakers, and who supports unions and wants to see the retirees get their money and everything. But he was enormously frustrated, just enormously frustrated, and recalled conversations he had with several of these executives in the past about when are you guys going to get your act together? Oh, we've learned, we're better, we're gonna reform and make better cars, and nothing happened.
Chuck's had one of the first.
You look up investigative journalist in the dictionary, you get a picture of Brian Ross of ABC News. He joins us now from New York. He filed a great piece for Good Morning America on how the CEOs of the big three automakers flew private planes into Washington. Let's show you some of his report. Watch this.
The man boarding this $36 million private luxury jet at the Detroit airport is the CEO of General Motors, Rick Wagoner, on his way to Washington to cry poor, to tell Congress that GM is burning through cash and will fail unless taxpayers bail out the auto industry with $10 to $12 billion for GM alone.
Brian, terrific reporting. What made you jump on this?
Well, I'm always interested in how the corporate royalty live, especially when they run companies that are out of cash asking for public money. So they took their private planes to go to Washington to ask for public money. Each of the three CEOs flew into Washington, each one in a separate jet worth about $35 million. Round-trip cost Larry about $20,000. A coach seat would have been about $335. First class, $900, but first class still isn't good enough for them.
Now, you confronted them about it at their appearance on Capitol Hill. Let's watch that.
Wagoner, who was paid almost $16 million last year, wasn't eager to talk about the private jet.
Mr. Wagoner, Brian Watson, ABC News. How are you? Question for you about your private jet. About the private jet you travel in. You say you're willing to make sacrifices. What about traveling in private jets? Why do you do that?
Do absolutely limit it to urgent situations.
You got your big jet parked here? Could you not have flown a commercial? Sir?
Had other meetings early this morning in Detroit, actually.
What did he say, Brian?
He said he had other meetings earlier in Detroit. There were flights we checked out of Detroit airport that would have gotten there in time for the hearing. But this is just the way he lives and the way all three of the CEOs at the auto companies live. I don't think it occurred to them that they should ever think about flying commercial. And in fact, they say that their corporate boards require them to fly for security reasons on private jets. That gives them certain tax advantages by making that a requirement. But the fact is, they talked about sacrifices. They primarily talked about the sacrifice of laying off tens of thousands of their workers, not so much their own personal sacrifice.
If they get a tax break for flying corporately, that means we're paying to fly them corporately.
There is a tax break involved if it's for security reasons, and that's what the reason they cite.
Why do they need security?
They are important men. They run big companies. I suppose they could imagine a kidnapping threat. Others say they have to be able to travel secretly to make deals that nobody sees where they're going. But the fact is, this is a nice way to travel. It's really seamless travel. The limousine or the big car takes you right up to the foot of the plane. You get on board, off you go. It's very efficient. There's no doubt about that. But for a company that says it's running out of cash, as Wagoner said about GM, it seems incongruous.
And they got some heat from lawmakers today when they testified before a House committee. Let's watch that.
I'm going to ask the three executives here to raise their hand if they flew here commercial. Let the record show no hands went up. Second, going to ask you to raise your hand if you're planning to sell your jet in place now and fly back commercial. Let the record show no hands went up.
Now, Brian, they don't see the irony of this?
Not in the least. There was no indication whatsoever that they were in any way shamed by it or bothered by it. In fact, we had crews out in Detroit tonight, and we saw the jet of the Ford CEO, Alan Mulally. It arrived, pulled into the big hangar Ford has at the Detroit airport so they could come out of the plane without being bothered by the cold weather or our cameras. And the GM, big G4 Gulfstream Ford jet, a $36 million jet, is running, engines ready to go out of Dulles Airport to take Wagoner home to Detroit later tonight.
Here's part of what a GM spokesman said about all this. Making a big to-do about this when issues vital to jobs of millions of Americans are being discussed in Washington is diverting attention away from a critical debate that will determine the future health of the auto industry. What do you make of that?
Well, I think what's involved here really is the symbolism. It's not the cost of the $20,000 round trip. That's not going to make the big difference to save the company. But it does go to what one lawmaker said, the arrogance of these CEOs. And do they get it? Do they understand what's going on in the rest of the country? When you travel the way they do, you're not in long lines. You're not exposed to the average American. And maybe they don't.
Do the Japanese, the Toyota, Honda CEOs, do they fly in their own jets?
Well, that's a question that I was asked this morning by Diane Sawyer, and to be honest, we couldn't quite find the answer. But I do know that the Japanese are not in front of Congress.